Okay, so I'm Layla. I have a creative agency based here in Chinatown. I started it almost 4 years ago when the pandemic first started up. And I just initially started with a lot of small businesses and I wanted to focus on nonprofits. And initially, I thought I would just be a nonprofit marketing agency. And I realized that it was kind of hard to grow and be sustainable if I was just focusing on that niche. But what ended up happening over time is all of the for-profit businesses that I've had the privilege and the honor of working with turned out to be very purpose-driven businesses. And a lot of them had a charitable component or they were giving back. And so what we've gotten to do over time is actually tell a lot of stories of their nonprofit partners or their community partners and how they're giving back. And it was basically sponsored by our for-profit clients. So I've got a couple case studies now, and our business model is really focused on how to help purpose-driven businesses that are committed to taking care of their community, sustainability, or giving back in some way. So for today's agenda, I hope a lot of you are actually signing up for the cohort or that we're going to get to see you guys in the future, because what I'm trying to do is give you the very basic foundational pieces. And I'm happy to actually share a workbook after this, if that's okay, Ellen, but I can share a workbook with everybody so that you guys can kind of go through some of the prompts and get really clear on your story and your why.
Yes, we can send it out with the recap email.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was gonna kind of go through all the prompts with you today, but it's sort of like a long, it's a lot of it's an inside job, right? When you're kind of trying to discover your why and the reason behind, starting your business. So we'll get into that in the next slide. But this is just a look at our core team. So Ember Media as a creative agency, it's very small. It's just a couple of us. But what we really leverage is our Storytellers Collective. And that's our growing network of independent freelancers. And they help us tell stories in their own unique way. If they're videographers, photographers, graphic designers, copywriters, etc. And that's a look at our team. What makes Ember Media unique, I think, is our core values. So one, being human-centered and understanding the power and the neuroscience behind storytelling, and knowing how to leverage that and kind of make these human-centered stories that reach people, that make an impact. Then that creative synergy, using the Storytellers Collective, not just because we have this big network of talented people, but what we really love to do is connect freelancers with jobs that they're specifically passionate about. So if we know that we have a photographer or writer that's really passionate about your field or your niche, then we love to connect you to, because we know that that's kind of one of our secret superpowers to making these stories take off, making them more meaningful, having it go a little bit deeper and be a little bit more profound. And then the last one is being results driven and just understanding how to look at our analytics and look at all of our numbers and make the most of that and hit all of your key objectives. So I'm breaking down our stages of brand storytelling today into these 3 steps. We're talking about 2 different things, right? Branding and having a brand identity. Even though I feel like it goes hand in hand with storytelling, some people have a relatively superficial brand and it doesn't always have a deeper meaning to it. So we're looking at how to approach branding and how to develop your marketing strategy through this storytelling lens, through our unique approach. And the first part of that is building your foundation and getting really clear on your purpose, your vision, your mission, and your values. So this is the workbook that I would love to share with you all. I've just started creating it recently because I found that so many of our clients needed it. If a client comes to us and they have a story that hasn't really been written down or refined, but they know why they started their business, it's easy for us to sort of take that and then give them creative direction and turn it into a story that their audience can resonate with. But sometimes a business that's just developing or getting started, they don't know how to talk about their why, or they haven't really clarified, their mission and vision and their core values. And I think that's a really important first step to take before wasting any time, creating content, building out your website, or all of your brand collateral. And the question that we're really trying to ask here is how you want to show up in the world and how you want people to feel when they interact with your brand. So, we put some thoughts or ideas down there at the bottom, like welcomed, inspired, understood, or supported. But when you think about brands that have left an impression on you, or even some of those like bigger companies that will pay an extra, we'll pay that higher price for because we recognize the brand. A lot of times it's because they've given us these stories, some of the bigger brands since we were children that we've seen forever. We feel like we have this relationship, this trust, this affinity with these brands. And so we'll go ahead and pay more, even though it's the same product or the same ingredients, because we recognize that name and it's a familiar face for us. Another big one is, and I'll include this in that workbook, is looking at your brand positioning and how you compare to your competitors, what makes you stand out from the rest of your industry, and how you can sort of differentiate yourself. So what we'll do is include in that workbook a SWOT analysis, where you look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then where you should position your brand ideally. For brand identity, for the second stage of this, once you're really clear on your mission, vision, and values, then we would start to look at your logo. I know a lot of people come to us and they've already got a logo. Sometimes we can, refine and modify it, but that's usually when you would start to look at your logo, your key messages. Key messages, in addition to your tagline, is also like a series of statements that you might see a lot throughout your website, your brochures, all of your brand collateral. And then we talked about positioning, signature video, photography, typography, graphics, and illustration. You want all of this to feel cohesive, and you want all of it to sort of reflect what you found in that first stage of developing your brand identity. And then the third phase, connection and community, is really just how we implement and deploy all of these pieces. So, once you're really clear on your mission, vision, and values, you turn that into your brand collateral, and you have a strong identity. You want it to be so recognizable that whether I discovered you on social media, whether I saw your flyer, on a window, you should always be able to recognize and spot that brand even from a distance. So, I mean, when you think about larger brands like Nike or Starbucks or, Apple, it's pretty minimalistic and we can recognize them without even seeing the name, without seeing any words, without it being written out for us. So that's the idea behind a really strong brand identity. And a lot of times in order to make that happen, you'll have your brand guidelines and a brand book. So if you're working with a designer, that's something that you really want to push for, or you want that to be part of your package. And if you're not, it's pretty easy to create one within Canva if you want to look up like a brand book or brand guideline template. But basically you would have easy access to your color palettes, your fonts, your signature photos, and your key messages all in this one book. The nice part about that is if you get really busy in your business and you want to outsource these pieces to any marketing support, to an independent, graphic designer, you send them this brand book, they can take that and run with it. So it makes our job a whole lot easier when we're equipped with something like that. And it's kind of become like a prerequisite or a requirement for us when we start working with the business to get that brand book developed first so that we know how to create everything going forward. These are all the touch points where somebody might interact with your brand and discover your brand for the first time. So ideally, like if somebody stumbles across your brand on social media at any given time, you want them to have a clear understanding of who you are and what you do. So if you've got your 4 content pillars in a rotation on your social media posts, you want them to know, what you're about, what you offer, and they should be able to see all of that like in your last 9 posts. So if you're a restaurant, for example, and you serve, really phenomenal craft cocktails, you serve great food, you have wonderful customer service, and you've got a good location and atmosphere. Those might be your 4 content pillars, and you want to rotate between all of those regularly. If your last 9 posts only show me cocktails, I might think you're just a bar. I might not know that you serve food. So the idea is that anybody can stumble upon your page or your site at any given time and immediately figure out who you are and what you do. People have very short attention spans, and I think everybody knows like the elevator pitch. Same thing goes for your online presence. Okay. So I think I got cut off when I was talking about this little bold part down here that says advanced, but basically once you feel like you've developed your brand story and you've kind of deployed it across all of these different touch points, it's still a continuous process. We are always refining it. I put testing down there because what you'll want to do, like with your ad campaigns and everything, is you might come out with multiple versions of your story. You might have your origin story, your hero story, and you would go ahead and publish those campaigns and test what resonates most with your audience. You continue doing research about your audience and learning more from your insights and your analytics. So it's just a continuous process. It's never really completely done. I feel like, every couple of years, people want to redo their website, redo their branding, but it should just be a refresh if you have a really strong foundation. So with the prompts that I'm going to send you all, I just want you guys to think about how you want to show up authentically and intentionally online. And I want you to think about, why you started your business, who you're trying to connect with. And I'll give you guys some examples. Like, our skincare client, Honua Skincare, is a Native Hawaiian founded business. She gives a lot back to nonprofits. First, she's already sourcing everything from small local farms and a lot of great, agricultural community groups. And that's a beautiful part of her story. She also gives a portion of her proceeds back to ocean conservation groups and groups for keiki and cultural preservation. Initially, when she came to us, she was just doing a lot of her regular marketing her products, a lot of nice product photography. And, we found that as soon as we got her to talk a little bit, which she's still a little apprehensive about, we're actually filming tomorrow to try to get more of her brand story and her why. But every time we have her come out and talk about why she started this business, we would see her content skyrocket, by 300 or 400%. People care so much more about her reason and her story than they do about the product itself and about, seeing what it looks like on a shelf. People want that human connection. They want to see the face that's behind it, especially at this point in time. I feel like there's a lot more conscious consumers. We all have more knowledge. We want to understand where our products and our ingredients come from. And I think having her come out and kind of share her knowledge, her passion, and the lengths that she'll go to sustainably source things has been a really beautiful part of telling her story. So another example is Kuleana coral restoration. Something that's come up for us a lot with our nonprofits that are more science-based is we realize that, numbers and statistics don't resonate with people. People don't get excited about that. They don't have a lot of emotional responses or feelings when you just hear about like population decline in numbers in that format. But when a human, comes on and tells the story and talks about what they used to see when they would go fishing as a kid versus the degraded reefs that they're looking at now and how depressing that is and how that affects their home and it affects everybody's livelihoods. I think those human stories bring a lot more meaning and drive more social change. So we're seeing that with both Kuleana coral and fish pono. And it was really great, that we got Kimmy Werner and Nainoa Thompson and a lot of these ambassadors to come out and speak about the importance of, fishing pono and not taking too much. But yeah, I think having the human face on there is so important. So I know a lot of people are shy and reluctant to show their face, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to, continue to stay relevant in the algorithm and across social media platforms and everything. This was another story that we told for Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. This is just an example of like once we had our brand colors, our fonts and everything down, we kind of figured that out in the first stage. Then we were able to create a lot of things very quickly. Like this campaign was only a few months long. We were able to produce all of their posters, dozens of social media posts, website, e-newsletters, etc. once you have the basic brand kit done and refined. Some really basic do's and don'ts. Obviously, you don't want to use jargon or get too technical when you speak about your business. So I think I'm guilty of that. I have a tendency to use, terms like ROI or abbreviations, and people don't always know what I'm talking about. You don't want to focus too much on yourself, but you want to figure out how you can make this a relatable story. You don't want to make your character and your story too perfect. If you can talk about a day when you didn't, have it all, like today, a day when you didn't have it all figured out, that was kind of relatable and people can feel the same pain point as you and understand what you went through. And then you provide that solution with your product or your service. You don't necessarily want to skim over the details. Sometimes that is what allows people to to imagine or envision the actual story. You don't want to oversell your call to action. I think this is a mistake we see people making a lot on social media. If you think about, how it feels to be on social media, scrolling through the feed and being inundated with so many posts that are trying to sell you something, the last thing you want to do is come across in that way. Ideally, you want to show up as a resource and not a sales pitch. So if you have some sort of, free advice or free guidance or inspiration that you can offer, that's going to be a lot more valuable to your followers. It gives them a reason to subscribe, even if they're not quite ready to make a purchase yet. And you don't want to overcomplicate the story. And then, of course, do's, you want to use visual aid as much as possible, video, photo, graphics. I would say if you can do a video with somebody speaking, that's always going to be your best option, even if it's voiceover, that takes us through the story. Obviously getting to know your audience, making sure that you're talking to the right people and showing up in the right spaces. I think one of the most important things on the do list that I'm looking at is be vulnerable. If you can show up and share stories that are real and transparent and authentic, people will feel that and they'll respect that. And of course, make it useful. Like I was saying, if you can be a resource, if you can provide like some free, teaser or service, or like I can give you guys a workbook, I think that helps a lot with building a relationship with your audience. And then I did want to open it up for Q&A at this point, if that's okay, Ellen.
So we have one question from Margie. She's asking, what is a general price range and time frame to have a professional setup for a new business brand book and initial website?
It depends on, who you're working with. We do work with a lot of different designers. So sometimes if a client comes to us and they don't, have a very big budget, if it's not within our normal price range, I can always refer them to a designer that might be able to work with them. And we're always happy to like provide support and guidance along the way. But if somebody comes to us at this point for, was it a brand book, like a brand identity development?
A brand book and initial website. I think it's two completely different things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to give ballpark figures. I think brand identity development at this point, the cheapest is probably starting at like 1,500 to 2,000. If it's a small business looking for a very basic brand identity. And then I definitely know designers that, we work with on a regular basis that are able to, they always work with smaller budgets when they can. So
Yeah, and then
website
just to
gets
add on
complicated.
there. Yeah, and then for initial website, I guess, Leila, I mean, if it's just a generic branding website, with what the company's about, like how much would that be?
So we've gotten to the point where we start charging based on the number of pages, because some websites have 3 and some have, 20. So I would say the base rate starts at 600 or 700 if it's a simple site, and then a couple hundred per page after that. And that's on the low end. So it's assuming it's a, relatively simple site. Sometimes with products and e-commerce, it can be more.
Definitely. Okay, Margie, I hope you answered your question. If not, feel free to throw in another one. We don't have another question at this point, but if anyone else has other questions, feel free to drop in. Leila, you want to continue with your presentation?
After that, I was just going to, I kind of wanted to do like breakout sessions, but I know it's not possible in the webinar. So
yeah. We just had another one come in from Dahi. He's asking, do you provide design curriculums for media training startups?
we provide what?
Design curriculums for media training startups. I don't really understand the question.
That's a very specific question. I think that would be a conversation.
Dahi, can you elaborate on that? Is it more, are you running a media training startup and you're looking for people to give you like a playbook to do so? Yeah, we are not enabling anyone to turn on their cameras or speak. So just throw your question in chat, in the Q&A, please. Okay, so David's asking, what is the cost for developing a company logo or redesigning an existing logo?
Everybody wants to know about prices.
Yeah.
Again, I think it kind of depends on like which designer can work on it. Sometimes when I work on things myself, or if I have, have certain designers work on it, it costs a little bit more. Um, just depends. I would have to get an idea of like what they have established already.
Is it more of a case of like, would it be easier if they came to you with a budget, I guess, and then you work with a budget? Or is it a matter of kind of, yeah, I personally, I think usually for businesses, and just speaking on behalf of like an agency perspective, it's easier if you come to us with a budget and then we can match you to the right people that can do it for what you're asking for, if that makes sense. And then developing a company logo is very different from redesigning an existing logo as well, because it depends on like what Leela was saying, right? Kind of going back to your brand values, and is that an exercise that the company has to go through altogether, to redefine it, or is it more of a color change just for an existing logo? This is a good one. So David's also again asking, what will a company need prior to searching for a logo designer? Or I guess, I mean, just to add on to that as well, like what do they need to look out for as they're interviewing different logo designers?
Well, I mean, definitely take a look at their portfolio. If you can look at their past work and you like their style, every designer has their own style. So you can get a general idea. If it's the same style as yours, if it's totally different, it's going to be hard to work with them if you have different creative visions.
And then he's also, I mean, kind of back to your first slide, I think. What will a company need prior to searching for a logo designer? Do you want to talk a little bit more in depth about the values and things that they would have to look at
Yeah,
within the
definitely.
company?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I should just pull up that workbook. It's work in
Yeah,
progress.
if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here, let me stop share for a moment. Because I basically just made this workbook recently because our clients needed it. So it's not like something we, formally had or distributed before. But we noticed that a lot of our clients needed, even the ones that have been around for a while, needed to kind of go back to the basics and figure out why they started and reassess like their messaging because it just wasn't feeling authentic anymore. And I think that happens every few years, it gets diluted or watered down. If you've been operating for a long time and you're just trying to keep your ads going and you're creating new content all the time, it starts to feel meaningless. And then you're just adding to the noise on social media. So it helps for us to just revisit the basics.
Sure. So Dahi, we will get to your question, but let Leela pull up her workbook so we can answer David's question about what a company needs prior to searching for a logo designer.
Okay, so super simple and clean right now. It'll actually be more branded by the time you guys receive it. Uh, but purpose and vision, we look at why we exist. Why do we care about the product, purpose, vision? Why should others care?
Hey, Leela, do you
And
mind
why do
zooming in a little bit? Because I'm afraid it might be a
yeah,
bit small for people.
yeah.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, great.
And why you do what you do. And I think the most important part here is really just to go back to why you started the business in the first place. Were you trying to solve a problem that you personally had or felt? Because that's always a great origin story to talk about. That's something that, you had a pain point, you solved a problem, your customers also experienced that. So you want to make that personal connection with them. And if you just saw a need and you took the opportunity to create something for it, that's a good thing to talk about. The mission, what are we here to do? What future do we want to create? This is when I really encourage people to start thinking about their legacy. Think big picture, like what do you want to leave behind? What sort of impression are you trying to make on the world? Because if you can start talking about that, even if it feels like it's 10, 20 years from now, if you start talking about that now and you get people excited, it's not just going to help sell your product or your service, but it also gets your employees, your investors, stakeholders, other people get really excited and want to be a part of what you're doing and they want to see it grow. Values, core values. I think this is another one that helps internally as much as externally. So like I was saying, it gets your stakeholders and everybody excited about what you're doing, when you have those core values and everybody understands like this is how we operate. This is with integrity, with with these core values. This is very important. How do we implement them? How do we inspire others? And then these are some client-specific prompts, but I will probably clean those up a little bit.
So I
SWOT
guess
analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. So are we saying that you need like all those components, kind of back to David's question. So for all those components, they would have to kind of think through it, prepare kind of answers to it, before searching for a logo designer? Or are there other components that they would have to look at? Like, is aesthetics important, like colors, like preferred colors, preferred fonts and things like that? Or would you say leave that to the logo designer?
Well, so that's the thing that the designer should be an expert in, but if they know what you're trying to achieve with this, so colors have their own psychology behind them, fonts, psychology, right? We know that certain fonts express that you're, a trustworthy, credible, reliable, safe business if you want to, be like a bank with a traditional font, as opposed to an artistic creative agency where you might have something that's like a little bit more flair, it might be funky. That is up to the designer. I think, you should hire somebody who's an expert in that, who you trust to guide you in that part of the process. But if you come to them and say, I want my clients to feel this when they land on my website, I want them to, experience this when they interact with us, I want them to feel safe, comforted, secure, whatever that is, then they can go ahead and bring that to life in a visual identity.
Sure. So David, I hope we answered your question. As mentioned, Leela was she will share this workbook so you can work through it, to prepare for your search for a logo designer. Let's move on to the next question. Not sure if this is applicable to you, but Dahi's asking, he's thinking of starting a media training business and he needs support in preparing teaching materials. I'm not sure if you guys do that at all.
Yeah, I think we would just have to have a conversation, and it would be, a lot of our quotes are just very customized. Sometimes we do just create presentations for people. So,
Yeah.
and pitch decks and things like that. So it's doable.
Sure, and then we will share your contact information at the end of the presentation as well. So let's move on to Margie's question. She's asking, for website, is there an ideal number of pillars to start with? Is it 3 to 4, or is it also possible to work with 6 to 8 pillars?
I would encourage you to do 3 to 4. But I've worked with organizations that had more, and I find that it gets kind of lost and diluted in the messaging. It's a lot. You just think about, your audience or your customer. Do you mind if I ask what type of business, what industry is this?
So Margie, feel free to throw it back in Q&A. I'll look for it.
Because
farm.
yeah, it's a what? Farm?
She runs a small farm.
Yeah, so you figure your audience or your customer, if they only have, these brief experiences where they get to interact with your brand, they learn about you in these small moments. If they have to retain that much information, it makes you less memorable in general. If it's just like 3 main points that I have to remember about you, then that might stick with me and leave a lasting impression.
So on the website, you were saying 3 to 4, maximum 3
3 to 4
actually,
is
right?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So David, back to David's other question. He's asking, my company is having trouble coming up with a strategy for finding new employees. How can storytelling help us attract job seekers?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not already using testimonials and using, employees and past team members to sort of tell that story, that's very important. You think about it as, put yourself in the shoes of the audience. If you're looking for a job and you're looking for somewhere where you want to work and you want to be, you should encounter content that makes you feel like excited and inspired. So if you can show a fun work environment, or, show employees that feel really fulfilled and happy in their position, just small sound bites, short interviews would be the way to go.
Yeah. I think another thing for that is also maybe what I've seen is companies actually asking their current employees why they like working there in the first place, and kind of taking that information and putting it back into the job description, because you'd be surprised, because we would think like, oh, maybe it's the pay or whatever, but there are other things or other intangible benefits that the employees see that, you know, as the owner, you might not, or as on the executive level, you might not. So I've seen that success as well with that approach. Catherine is asking, what is the best way to approach coming up with meaningful content ideas that align with your content pillars without being redundant or running out of ideas?
That one, I mean, it's one of those questions if I would want to know more about the industry or give you, specific feedback. But ideally, if you have your content pillars, there are a lot of like lead magnets or, leads that are trending and performing well across social media that can be applied to any industry. And those change all the time. So, I mean, that's something that I could share with you guys, or, if we ever had a strategy session, I would help you find those. But yeah, there's definitely a way to continue creating new content based on what's trending.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of doing research on social to find out what people are talking about pertaining to that specific industry. So, Catherine, if you want, if you don't mind sharing like what industry you're in, I think we might be able to come up with a little bit more specific ideas for you to figure this out. Just throw it back in Q&A. Her second sub question is it possible for content pillars to change over time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
and
maybe
if the content pillars are changing over time, that means that the business itself is also changing. So, I mean, that's going back, to your core like business model. Things about your business model might be changing, and that's okay. But that's when the content pillars start to change as well.
it could also be the general like kind of industry or the environment as well, the economic environment. I think it depends on the macro trends that are out there that are changing, because those are also conversation starters, right? And you kind of want to write on that to show how relevant your company is within the industry itself. So I think definitely possible for content pillars to change. Maybe Leela, if you can share kind of just based on Jathrine's question, like what kind of process did you use? For example, like I'm familiar with Fishpono because we worked on it together, but maybe like in the case of Fishpono, like how did you guys come up with, meaningful content ideas based on the different pillars, right? And I think that's a hard one as well, because your deliverables are pretty precise. It's like getting people to testify, or you have certain like key measurables. Maybe if you want to use that as a talking point to
I don't know
Jathrine's
if
question.
Fishpono is the best example because it's actually
Yeah.
such a complicated one, right? We're trying to
Mhm.
get legislative support, so that's probably one of our most complicated. I love to use the restaurant example because I think it's one that everybody can follow along with. But for example, their content pillars actually shifted recently, our restaurant client, because they started as a bar with small bites, and they're now a full, dinner service restaurant. So that was one thing, like we really had to pivot and emphasize food over cocktails and all of that. When we're looking for content that's trending, even though I have, all these different apps and tools that I use as a professional, for anyone who's just managing their own, you just go to the Explore tab and you'll notice that, most of the stuff you're being shown is using trending audio. So you can always tap on that if you guys aren't already doing it. And you can see trending sounds if people are all jumping on, if it's like a funny voiceover or a song or whatever, and everybody's jumping on that trend, you can find all of that in your Explore tab when you're on Instagram. So, I mean, that's one really easy, and TikTok, that's one really easy place to start if you guys are just looking for content ideas. Now, once you start engaging with your industry on social media, so I'm a restaurant and I only engage with, food and restaurants on social media, then that's the type of content that the Explore tab is going to show me. So when I log into each of my clients' accounts, I'm seeing stuff that's relevant to them. So I get all kinds of skincare ideas in that Explore tab. I get, restaurant ideas in that one. And I'm constantly seeing new, cool, trendy ways to get people's attention. So, I mean, ideally, if you're engaging with the right community on your business profile, you're going to start to see that too.
Do you use other kind of platforms outside of Instagram and TikTok, like either, search, like Google search, or, Google keywords to see what people are searching for instance?
Not to see what people are searching for on social. I have a couple things that are just apps I use to find trends, just like paid apps that I subscribe to. but I haven't needed those as much lately. I feel like the Explore tab and even the way that they share trending audio now, I don't need all of those extra apps that I pay for. So
Okay. Any other questions that people have? So David is asking, can you explain what media platform is best for different ways to tell our story? Television, radio, in-person events, newsletters, social, search.
yeah, I mean, that'll be different for each case, right? But I do feel like it's important to, decide which platforms are going to work best for you, which ones you want to prioritize. And then as you create content, like let's say I'm doing a feature on one of our designers or photographers. If I'm going to sit down and interview them and take the time to capture their story, create video and photo content, you can repurpose that across all of these platforms. And you should be looking for ways to do that to, maximize how much time and money you spent on producing the content in the first place. Explain which media platform is best for different ways to tell our story.
At least for me, I think what's also important is being able to measure the kind of investment you're putting into each of the different platforms. So, repurposing content is great, but at the same time, I think it really depends on like the key trigger, right? Or the lever for each platform. So if it's like radio, it's definitely not visual. So you have to figure out some way to measure that, as well. So I think maybe I know David was asking about the whole employment strategy or getting people, working for him. Maybe we want to look at these different platforms. How would you, I know this is a hard one because, we just
No,
have this pro, but how would
actually a
you,
really good point. On social media, there's actually a lot of limitations. So you're not, you can't always advertise employment opportunities until you get verified and all of that. So you might actually have more luck with television and radio. I would say, again, if you know which platforms you're prioritizing, produce the content for that first and foremost. If there's an opportunity to repurpose it, that's great. Go ahead and do that. But for employment opportunities, I think television, radio, and in-person would be ideal.
how would a message be different, I guess, across these different platforms?
I mean, ideally, you want your key messages to sort of be consistent. It's just about the way that you present them on these platforms, right? So you would still want to use, like we talked about, getting a testimonial, from an employee. I think you would still want to use that. You would want to ask those questions, right? Like, why do you love working here? What's the best part about being here? And take those best responses and try to compile them for these different platforms.
Okay, thanks, David. Any other questions? No other questions. Seems kind of quiet today. Do you have other things that you want to share, Leela, from your presentation?
Not necessarily. I really love to do this as breakout sessions. So, I mean, I hope, some people are interested in joining the cohort, or I hope people, have questions and reach out after they see the workbook. But it's so different for every industry, and it's so easy for us to kind of brainstorm content pillars together and make progress once we have that breakout session or have that established. So,
Okay. Yeah, we don't have, we don't have breakout sessions for this particular one today.
yeah, no, I totally understand. As I was developing it, I'm like, it's much easier for me to give you guys valuable, input and action items once I know a little bit about the industry we're talking about.
So maybe I think just to, so yeah, Margie, we will send an email out with information about the cohort. It's the e-commerce and digital marketing cohort that we're talking about here. That's there's an information session next Wednesday at 11:30. So I'll send information out on that for you to RSVP for the info session. But I think Leela, so if someone wanted to work with you, maybe you could run through the process of like the onboarding. Like, what do you do with them? How do you learn about their business? And any pre-work that you want them to do. And I know you have that workbook, but on top of that, I guess things that you want them to think about.
Yeah, and so that workbook that I talked about, I just want to say, like, in the last few years, we never gave that workbook to anybody. Nobody came to us with all of that figured out, and it's not like a requirement. But I am learning that we sometimes have to go backwards, back to basics, and figure all that out at a later date. So it helps if we get that from the get-go. I think we can give them more valuable brand collateral and assets, save everybody, some time and money by not having to reproduce anything. So when they first come to us, we usually do an audit and recommendations. And that's basically just looking at their current online presence, looking for opportunities to improve. And we give pretty detailed recommendations in that audit. So you could potentially take that and just run with it. If you want to have somebody in-house do that, we made the audit really affordable, and it's free if we onboard you like in a monthly contract. The audit becomes free. So if you're going to be, an ongoing social media client with us, the audit is covered by that. But if you just want to pay for the audit, it's a pretty good deal, and it's kind of our cheat sheet. It's like, this is exactly what we would do and how we do it. You're welcome to just have, your assistant do this for you. A lot of times people take a look at the audit and recommendations, and it's so detailed and elaborate. They usually just want the support and, embrace the team. So after audit and recommendations, we just finalize proposal and contracts. We get all of your brand collateral that you currently have, sort of assess what you're missing. So we see if you have the brand book built out already. If you don't, we do try to just build it out for you. If a lot of work needs to be done, then we provide a quote, for that. But if it's something that we can easily help you with, sometimes people have a logo, but it's low resolution, it's not vectorized, things like that. So if we can just help you clean it up and get it polished, then, I just always include that with a new client. Yeah, and once we get you set up and we sort of refine your brand story and figure out what our quarterly campaigns are going to look like. So I try to have about 2 campaigns per quarter to focus on, because that just gives us some, strong campaign messaging so that we know, like, this month we're going to go really hard on this product. We're going to talk about this a lot. And it gives us some structure, strategy, and production dates around it. So yeah, about 2 campaigns per quarter is what I recommend. If we try to do more than that, I think people get overwhelmed and it gets diluted.
And then when you say campaigns, there's a specific measurable behind it, whether it be conversions to product sales or whether it's kind of right, like increasing number of followers on social, things like that. So yeah, so I guess I think what would be interesting is, businesses often say, hey, I would love to put money into brand campaigns and branding and so on, but I don't know how much it actually benefits me as a brand. What do you use to, what would you say to that? And is there a specific way for you to actually measure brand presence, for instance, to show that, their brand has improved and so on?
Yeah, I definitely think that the campaign ideally should be tied to a call to action. So if it can be tied to an event with, ticket sales or signups, even if it's a free event and it's just an opportunity for you to get your audience to come in and meet you and generate leads, I think you should have a specific call to action or a product you're trying to sell, a specific package. So usually our clients will come to us and say, oh, my 2 campaigns will be Valentine's Day and Mother's Day for, the restaurant, or maybe Giving Tuesday for the nonprofit. And even though that's great and it's easy for us to create a campaign around that, I also like to remind people that everyone else is doing a campaign on the same day. So that's not always the best way to go. I like to do a lot around Ember Media's anniversary or birthday. It doesn't belong to anyone else, right? It's not like everyone else is doing a campaign on the same day. So, sometimes we'll do a giveaway, we'll throw a little event, we'll generate leads that way, even if that's not the intention, because we have this fun campaign going on for a few weeks surrounding our anniversary. So I think that's ideal. If people have an anniversary event or, a date that's unique to them that they don't think everyone else in their niche, in their field is jumping on, I think that's perfect.
So kind of, well, you would have to do something, during that, your busy period. But what you're saying as well, it's like when no one else is talking about anything that's majorly important within that occasion, it's important for you to come up with something that defines you or makes you unique, so that you can continue to gather momentum and conversations and so on around your brand, right?
Yeah, and we do see those campaigns go a lot farther. Ad spend is better. If you're, doing a promotion on Valentine's Day and everyone else is also paying to promote their stuff on Valentine's Day, you just get buried in the feed really fast, right? You're at the bottom of the algorithm. So you're paying more, you're being seen less, and everyone's already kind of feeling overwhelmed and inundated with ads about the same topic, so they don't want to see it. Same thing like Giving Tuesday for nonprofits. Every nonprofit is trying, to get donations on Giving Tuesday. It's not really an ideal time to try to do a paid campaign or anything like that. So.
Cool. All right, so let's see. Do we have any other questions? We have 2 more minutes left to this session. It's a very quiet group today. No. Okay. So Leela, I think some people were asking you for your contact details. Do you have a slide that shows the information, or do you want to throw it in chat
I'll throw it
for
in chat.
everyone?
I'll
Okay,
throw it in
cool.
chat and then I'll put it at the end of the workbook. Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. And I will leave your contact details in the recap email as well. So anyone who gets it, feel free to reach out to Leela, and speak to her directly about your branding needs as well. Cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say what we would do. I mean, we can do in-person events at the studio too, but what we've done in the past with these breakout sessions is I basically give, especially with small businesses, I basically give everybody our template and formula that we use for the audit and recommendations. And I kind of just walk everyone through it. So you get to fill in your own. So, I mean, I'm happy to do things like that, in the future. If we have a few requests and people want one, we can do that.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to throw, let's see, sorry, I wonder if everyone has it. So again, just a reminder, the HTDC Innovate Hawaii e-commerce and digital marketing cohort is going to be starting in April. There will be an information session about it. This is actually going to be our 6th cohort. Innovate Hawaii started this program back during the pandemic to help a lot